Welcome to Strawberry Drama. Before embarking on this amazing story, subscribe to the channel, give it a like and share. Lee Ji-yeon stared at her reflection in the mirror of the executive bathroom at Lee Corporation in Gangnam, Seoul, as she methodically undid the elegant bun her mother had insisted on doing that morning. Her deft fingers purposely messed up the black strands that now fell messily over her shoulders. Perfect, she muttered to herself, purposely applying a slightly smudged red lipstick. At 28, Ji-yeon was a respected digital marketing executive, but today her goal was to look as inappropriate as possible for a blind date. Park Min-ha, her best friend and co-worker, walked into the bathroom and her eyes widened. "Ji, are you really going to do that? Your mom will have a fit when she finds out." "That's exactly the point," Ji-yeon replied, swapping her elegant heels for a pair of worn-out sneakers that she kept in her bag. "If I have to attend one more of these arranged meetings, at least I'll make sure it's the last one." The plan was simple: show up at the prestigious Maple Garden restaurant looking completely inappropriate for a 32-year-old CEO who, according to her mother, was the perfect catch. Kim Dong-won, heir to the Kim Group, had a reputation for being extremely demanding and traditionalist. As she rode down the panoramic elevator in the business building, Ji-yeon recalled the heated argument she'd had with her mother the night before. "Daughter, you're almost 30. All your cousins are already married," her mother had argued, pouring more kimchi into Ji-yeon's bowl during the weekly family dinner. "And they're all unhappy, Amma. I want to marry for love, not convenience," Ji-yeon had replied, but ended up giving in to family pressure as usual. However, this time would be different. The cab stopped in front of Maple Garden, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Gangnam. Ji-yeon adjusted her thick-framed glasses, which she didn't even need to wear, and grabbed her shabby handbag. As she entered the luxurious establishment, she immediately noticed the disapproving looks from the other customers. The maitre d' looked her up and down, his discomfort evident. "Miss Lee, Mr. Kim is already waiting." As she was led to the table, Ji-yeon mentally rehearsed her behavior. She would be overly informal, talk with her mouth full, and ask inappropriate questions about money. No traditionalist CEO could stand more than 15 minutes of her company. That's when his eyes met Kim Dong-won. He was nothing like the pictures his mother had shown him. Yes, he wore an impeccable suit that probably cost more than his monthly salary, but his eyes, there was something different about them. A playful, almost mischievous twinkle that didn't match his stern reputation. "Miss Lee," he stood up, and Ji-yeon noticed that he was even taller in person. What an interesting choice of look. There was a tone in his voice that disconcerted her. It wasn't disapproval, as she had expected, but genuine curiosity. "Oh, this," she gestured at her purposely disheveled outfit. "It's my casual Friday style." "It's Tuesday," he replied, a small smile forming at the corner of his lips. "Every day is Friday when you live life intensely," she declared, throwing herself into her chair carelessly. To her surprise, Dong-hwan laughed. Not a polite, restrained laugh, but a hearty laugh that attracted the attention of the neighboring tables. "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, "I've spent the whole week in meetings with people trying to impress me. It's refreshing to meet someone who's clearly trying to do the opposite." Ji-yeon felt his cheeks flush. That wasn't in the script. He should have been horrified, not delighted. Dinner progressed surprisingly well. The more Ji-yeon tried to be inappropriate, the more Dong-hwan seemed to enjoy himself. Not only did he tolerate her behavior, he actively participated, telling stories about disastrous meetings and imitating pretentious executives. "So," he asked as they enjoyed dessert, "when did you decide to sabotage this meeting? Was it when you found out I was CEO, or when your mother mentioned my impeccable family lineage?" Ji-yeon choked on her ice cream. "How?" "I have 3 younger sisters," he explained, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I've seen every possible trick to escape arranged encounters. Although I must admit that your commitment to the role was impressive." For the first time that night, Ji-yeon felt truly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Don't apologize," he interrupted her gently. "Your honesty, even through this little rebellion, is more valuable to me than all the perfectly groomed suitors I've ever met." Ji-yeon's plan had definitely backfired. Instead of pushing Kim Dong-won away, Her attempt to appear inadequate had revealed exactly who she was. Someone who wasn't afraid to defy expectations. At the end of the night, when Dongwon insisted on calling a driver to take her home, Ji-yeon realized she was in trouble. Not only had her plan failed spectacularly, but she was beginning to genuinely like the CEO she was supposed to loathe. As the luxury car glided through the brightly lit streets of Seoul, Ji-yeon looked at the message she had just received. "Next time, come as you are. Although I must admit, I found the glasses charming. Dong-hwan." Ji-yeon smiled at the phone, realizing that sometimes the best plans are the ones that go completely wrong. The morning after the meeting, Ji-yeon arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping to avoid Park Min-he's inevitable interrogation. Her plans were foiled when she found her friend already waiting at her desk with 2 American coffees. Well, Min-he practically jumped out of her chair. How did the planned disaster go? Ji-yeon sank into her ergonomic chair, turning slightly to avoid her friend's inquisitive gaze. It wasn't exactly a disaster. What? But you were so determined. What happened to the foolproof plan? Before Ji-yeon could answer, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Dongwon. "That Italian restaurant in Apgujeong has amazing carbonara. Maybe we can test your theory about every day being Friday." An involuntary smile appeared on his lips, something that didn't go unnoticed by Min-he, who quickly snatched the phone out of his hands. "Lee Ji-yeon," exclaimed Min-he, her eyes scanning the screen. "Are you flirting with the CEO you were supposed to scare away?" "I'm not flirting," Ji-yeon protested, retrieving his phone. "It's just that he's nothing like we expected." At that moment, the office began to buzz with whispers and unusual movements. Through the glass walls, Ji-yeon saw several executives hurrying towards the main meeting room. "What's going on?" he asked Min-he. "Oh, haven't you heard? The Kim Group is considering a partnership with our agency to manage their entire digital presence," Min-he replied, organizing some documents. "Their CEO is coming in person for the presentation today." Ji-yeon felt his stomach turn. "The CEO? Kim Dong-won?" "Exactly him," a male voice replied behind them. Ji-yeon turned to find Dong-won standing there, impeccable in his navy blue suit, an amused smile playing on his lips. Unlike the night before, he emanated an aura of authority that made the staff around him bow respectfully. "Miss Lee," he continued, formal but with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, "I hope you can present us with your digital marketing proposal. I've heard excellent things about your work." Min-he looked from one to the other, dumbfounded, while Ji-yeon tried to maintain his professional composure. "Of course, Mr. Kim. I've prepared a full presentation." Throughout the meeting, Ji-yeon maintained his professionalism, presenting innovative digital marketing strategies with the same confidence he displayed on a daily basis. Occasionally, her eyes met those of Dong-hwan, who watched her with a mixture of professional admiration and something else she couldn't quite define. After the presentation, while the executives discussed the details of the contract, Dong-hwan discreetly called her into the coffee room for a private chat. "I must admit," he began, "that I'm impressed. Your presentation was as accurate as your plan to alienate me yesterday was disastrous." "About yesterday," Ji-yeon began, but was interrupted by Dong-hwan's genuine smile. "You know, I've tried to sabotage arranged meetings in the past too," he confessed, pouring coffee for them both. "I once showed up at one wearing a company mascot costume." Ji-yeon couldn't help laughing. "You're kidding. I wish I could say that," he laughed. "But my dad's business partner's daughter thought it was cute and ended up stalking me for months." The moment was interrupted when Dong-hwan's secretary rushed in. "Mr. Kim, your mother is on the line. She wants to know about yesterday's meeting." Dong-hwan's smile faltered slightly. "Tell her I'm in a meeting." After the secretary left, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. "Our mothers are probably exchanging messages right now," Ji-yeon commented, trying to ease the tension. "No doubt," he agreed. "But can we try something different? How about we build it our way, without their pressure?" "Does that mean you want to see me again? Even after my show yesterday?" "Especially after your show yesterday," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. "But this time, how about we just be Dong-hwan and Ji-yeon? No CEOs, no arranged meetings, no expectations." Before Ji-yeon could reply, her phone vibrated with a message from her mother. Kim Dong-won called his mom. "He loved you. I knew that outfit I chose would be perfect." Ji-yeon showed the message to Dong-won, who couldn't contain his laughter. "I don't think we should tell her about your little fashion rebellion." "Maybe one day," she smiled, realizing that her plan to avoid a relationship had turned into something completely different. When she returned to her desk, she found Minha practically jumping up and down with curiosity. "Well, Seoul's most coveted CEO is interested in our little rebel?" "It's complicated," Ji-yeon replied, but she couldn't hide the smile that stubbornly appeared on her lips. "Complicated is how all the best stories begin," Minha declared with a knowing air. That evening, as he was organizing his table to leave, Ji-yeon received another message from Dong-won. "About that carbonara, is it still on for tomorrow? I promise not to wear a mascot costume." Looking at his phone screen, Ji-yeon realized that sometimes the best dates are the ones that start with a completely wrong plan. The Italian restaurant in Abuyang was particularly busy that evening when Ji-yeon arrived, this time dressed as she really was, an elegant but comfortable blazer over a silk blouse, well-cut pants and shoes that didn't trip her up. Her hair was naturally loose, without the purposeful chaos of the first meeting. Dong-won was already waiting for her, but not in the main hall. The maitre d' led her to a private terrace, decorated with soft lights and a view of the Seoul skyline. The city shone like a sea of stars at her feet. "No mascot costume?" she joked as she approached. "I saved it for the third date," he replied with a mischievous smile, getting up to pull out his chair. "You look beautiful, and this time, I think it's the real you." Dinner flowed naturally, the conversation moving between professional and personal matters. Dong-won shared stories about growing up as the only male child among three sisters, while Ji-yeon talked about his passion for analog photography, a hobby he kept hidden from his traditionalist family. "You know," Dong-won commented as they savored the famous carbonara, "after yesterday's meeting, I did a little research into your work. Your digital campaigns are revolutionary." Ji-yeon felt her cheeks heat up. "You researched me?" "I confess I did. And I found her photography blog too." She almost choked on her wine. "How?" "The initials LJY Photography aren't exactly an elaborate disguise," he smiled. "Your street photos in Busan are particularly impressive." The mention of Busan made Ji-yeon stiffen slightly. Those photos were taken during a difficult period in his life, when he temporarily fled family expectations in order to find his way, as he told his friends. Dong-won noticed the change in his expression. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be invasive." "No, it's okay." She took a deep breath. "Busan represents a complicated time. I had just finished college, and everyone expected me to follow in my father's footsteps in the family business. Photography was my escape valve." "And how did you end up in digital marketing?" "It was a compromise. My way of being creative within the parameters accepted by society," she admitted, playing with her napkin. "And you? Have you always wanted to be a CEO?" It was Dong-won's turn to get pensive. "Actually, I wanted to be a musician. I've been playing the piano since I was 5. Famous CEO Kim Dong-won, a frustrated pianist. Ji-yeon teased gently. "I still have a piano at home," he confessed. "I play when I need to think, usually late at night." The conversation was interrupted by Dong-won's cell phone, which showed a call from his mother. He silenced the device with a sigh. "Let me guess." Ji-yeon smiled understandingly. "She wants to know how our relationship is going?" "Worse. She's already planning our wedding." The comment hung in the air like a heavy cloud. It was the first time the word marriage had come up between them since their disastrous blind date. "Dong-won," Ji-yeon began, choosing her words carefully. "What exactly are we doing?" "This didn't start out in the most conventional way, and that's exactly why it's working," he added, reaching for her hand on the table. "We both know what it's like to live under the weight of expectations. Maybe it's time we wrote our own story." Just then, a familiar tune began to play in the restaurant. It was a piano melody that Ji-yeon recognized from somewhere. "That song," she began. "Yuruma, River Flows in You," Dong-won explained. "It was the first piece I learned to play perfectly." Without warning, he stood up and held out his hand. Dance with me? Here? Now? Ji-yeon looked around, aware of the other customers. Why not? You showed up on a blind date looking like a 90s rebel. I think we can afford a dance. Laughing, she accepted his hand. On the private terrace, under the Seoul stars, they danced slowly, letting the music dissolve the last barriers between them. You know, Ji-yeon murmured against his shoulder. Maybe our mothers weren't completely wrong. Don't let them find out, he replied with a smile in his voice. They'll never let us forget. When the song ended, they held each other for a moment longer than necessary. Dongwon's cell phone vibrated again in his pocket, but this time it was a message from his younger sister. Alma is going crazy. She's already researching wedding venues. Help. They laughed together at the message, but there was a new tension in the air. The reality of their lives, families, and social expectations was beginning to seep into their bubble. One step at a time, Dongwon suggested, as if reading their thoughts. One step at a time, Ji-yeon agreed, returning to the table. The rest of the evening passed in a comfortable bubble of confidences and laughter. When they finally left the restaurant, the city had turned into a kaleidoscope of night lights. Can I show you something? Dongwon asked, guiding her to his car. 20 minutes later, they were on the rooftop of one of the Kim Group skyscrapers, with a panoramic view of the whole of Seoul. I come here when I need to escape, he explained. It's my own little corner of Busan in Seoul. Ji-yeon smiled, understanding perfectly what he meant. Everyone needed a place to be truly themselves. As they looked out over the city, side by side, Ji-yeon realized that his initial plan to avoid an arranged marriage had turned into something much more meaningful, the chance to meet someone who fully understood the weight of the masks they both carried. The soft sound of the piano echoed through Dongwon's apartment when Ji-yeon arrived for the dinner he had promised to prepare. She stopped at the door, mesmerized by the melancholy melody that flowed through the walls. After a few seconds, the music stopped and the door opened. Sorry, I got lost in time. Dongwon smiled, still with the sleeves of his dress shirt folded up to his elbows. It's an old habit to ring before important occasions. The apartment was surprisingly cozy for a CEO, with walls full of black and white photographs and, of course, the majestic grand piano that took pride of place in the living room. Do you really cook or did you ask your private chef? Teased Ji-yeon, following him into the integrated kitchen. I resent your lack of confidence, he replied, gesturing dramatically at the ingredients arranged on the counter. I learned to cook when I studied in France. It's surprising how no one expects the heir to a conglomerate to know how to make his own ramen. While Dongwon prepared what promised to be a mushroom risotto, Ji-yeon wandered around the room, looking at the photographs. One in particular caught his eye, a younger Dongwon sitting at the piano, surrounded by his family, all smiling except for him. My graduation recital, he explained, noticing his interest. The day I announced that I wouldn't pursue a career in music. Why? Ji-yeon asked softly. My father had a heart attack that week, he revealed, stirring the risotto harder than necessary. That's when I realized that dreams have a price, and sometimes other people pay for them. The silence that followed was filled only by the bubbling of the wine reducing in the risotto. Ji-yeon approached, gently touching his arm. Show me how it's done, he asked, indicating the pan. Grateful for the change of subject, Dongwon positioned himself behind her, guiding her hands in the circular motion necessary for the perfect risotto. The closeness made Ji-yeon's heart race. Did you know that there's a theory that says the secret to a good risotto is love? He murmured close to her ear. That's the most cliché thing I've ever heard. She laughed, but didn't move away. The moment was interrupted by Ji-yeon's cell phone. It was her mother for the third time that day. Are you going to answer it? Dongwon asked, turning away to open more wine. I'd better not. She probably wants to know why we haven't set a date for the engagement yet, Ji-yeon sighed, turning off her cell phone. My mom suggested next month, he commented casually, causing Ji-yeon to almost drop the glass he was holding. What? Relax, he smiled. I've already made it clear that we'll do this in our own time. Over dinner, they talked about work, dreams deferred, and family expectations. The risotto was surprisingly delicious. I have a proposal, Dongwon said suddenly. How about a trip? A trip? to Busan. I've seen in your photos how the city inspires you. Besides, he hesitated briefly, there's a classical music festival happening next weekend. Do you want to play? Ji-yeon asked, realizing the true intention behind the invitation. I want to show you a part of me that's been kept under wraps for a long time, he admitted. And maybe you can show me Busan through your lens. The proposal hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meanings. It was more than just a trip. It was a chance to get to know the truest versions of each other, away from the pressures of Seoul and family expectations. Our mothers are going to go crazy, Ji-yeon commented, but he was already smiling. Let them go crazy, he replied, getting up to go to the piano. Do you want to hear something? Ji-yeon nodded, settling down on the sofa as Don Juan began to play. It wasn't a classical piece this time, but a composition of his own that spoke of choices, renunciations, and new beginnings. Watching him play, Ji-yeon realized she was mentally photographing every moment. The way his fingers danced over the keys, the serene expression on his face, the city shining through the panoramic windows. Let's go to Busan, she decided when the song ended. But on one condition. What? You have to promise to play at the festival. Don Juan was silent for a moment, his hands still on the keys. Only if you promise to make an exhibition of your photos one day. Are you trying to bargain with me, Mr. Kim? She teased. Just encouraging mutual sleeping dreams, Miss Lee, he replied with a smile. Later, when Ji-yeon arrived home, she found dozens of unread messages from her mother and a single message from Don Juan. I've already booked the tickets to Busan. Prepare your camera and your heart. Lying on her bed, Ji-yeon realized that she was about to embark on a journey far greater than a simple weekend trip. She was about to rediscover parts of herself that she had kept for so long, together with someone who fully understood the weight of abandoned dreams. And maybe, just maybe, they could help each other recover these lost parts of themselves. The bullet train glided smoothly along the tracks towards Busan, while Ji-yeon observed the landscape through his analog camera. Don Juan dozed lightly beside him, his serene face contrasting with the ever-formal posture he maintained in Seoul. The decision to travel together had caused exactly the uproar they had hoped for in their families. Ji-yeon's mother called 5 times in a row when she found out, alternating between ecstasy at the progress of the relationship and concern about appearances. A lady doesn't travel alone with a man before marriage, she had declared dramatically. Amma, this is the 21st century, Ji-yeon replied, although she was already anticipating the gossip that would circulate in their family's social circles. The movement of the train roused Don Juan, his eyes immediately meeting the camera lens pointed at him. Are you already documenting our moments? He smiled sleepily. Just capturing the rare moment when the mighty CEO Kim drooled in his sleep, she teased, lowering the camera. Defamation. I'll sue, he feigned indignation, but his eyes sparkled with amusement. The festival starts at 7 p.m. We have a few hours to explore the city beforehand. Arriving in Busan, they checked into separate rooms in a boutique hotel overlooking the sea. Ji-yeon insisted on starting her private tour of the city's less touristy alleyways, where she used to photograph during her stint of self-imposed exile, as she called it. Here, she pointed to a small traditional tea house, almost hidden between modern buildings. That's where I decided I could no longer pretend to be who I wasn't. They entered the establishment, where an elderly woman recognized Ji-yeon immediately. The photographer is back, and with company this time. Sitting on traditional cushions, sipping green tea and rice dumplings, Ji-yeon shared more of her story. I came here every day, talked to Mrs. Kim for hours. She was the first person who saw my photos and told me that I had real talent. She paused, looking down at her cup. She was also the one who convinced me that I could find a middle ground between my dreams and my responsibilities. Don Juan reached his hand across the low table. Is that why digital marketing was your choice? A bridge between art and business? Something like that, she smiled. And you? When did you decide that music would be your hobby and not your profession? His expression darkened slightly. After my father's heart attack, I realized that the stress of managing the group was literally killing him. I couldn't let that happen, not when I had the ability to help. Leaving the tea house, They walked to the harbor, where Jiyeon began photographing the fishermen preparing their nets for the night. Dongwon watched her with fascination, noticing how she seemed freer, more authentic, away from the pressures of Seoul. "The festival is at the Busan Cultural Center," he commented, checking the time. "I haven't signed up to play yet." "But you will," she said, not a question, "because here you can also be more yourselves." At the cultural center, the atmosphere was vibrant with musicians from all over Asia. Dongwon hesitated briefly before filling in the application form for a performance. "Which piece are you going to play?" Jiyeon asked, noticing his fingers drumming nervously on the counter. "The one I was composing when we met," he replied, surprising her. "I've never played my own compositions in public before." The evening progressed, and Dongwon's tension was palpable as other musicians performed. Jiyeon guided him out of the auditorium for a moment of fresh air. "What if I don't make it?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Then we'll have a story to tell," she smiled, adjusting her slightly crooked tie. "But you'll make it." When his name was called, Dongwon walked up to the piano as if he were in one of his business meetings, back straight, serious expression. But as he sat down at the instrument, something changed. His hand slid across the keys, and the melody that was born was unlike anything Jiyeon had ever heard. It was complex and simple at the same time, carrying echoes of guarded dreams and new beginnings. From his seat in the audience, Jiyeon photographed silently, capturing every expression, every movement. Through her lens, she saw not CEO Kim Dong-hwan, but simply Dong-hwan, the pianist who never ceased to exist. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of absolute silence before the applause began. Dong-hwan opened his eyes, looking surprised to find tears in them. Later, walking along the moonlit beach, he finally spoke about the performance. "It was like breathing after being submerged for a long time," he confessed. "I didn't know how much I missed it until today." "Sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves again," Jiyeon replied, his camera hanging around his neck capturing the reflection of the moon on the sea. "Is that what you did in Busan?" "It's what I'm still doing," she smiled, turning the camera to photograph him once again, now with the night ocean as a backdrop. "And now I'm not alone on this journey." Dongwon's cell phone vibrated, his mother, probably worried about the rumors about the trip. He silenced it without looking. "You know," he said, taking the camera from her hands gently, "I think I need to document this moment too." The photo he took of her, laughing with her hair in the wind and the sea in the background, perfectly captured the essence of that evening, a moment of freedom, of authenticity, of new beginnings. Back at the hotel, they parted in the corridor with the promise of exploring more of the city the next day. But they both knew they were exploring much more than Busan. They were rediscovering parts of themselves they had forgotten existed. The return to Seoul brought with it a new dynamic between Jiyeon and Dongwon. The still undeveloped photos from Busan held memories of a weekend that had changed something fundamental in their relationship. However, reality awaited them with its own surprises. On Monday, Jiyeon found her office desk covered in elaborate floral arrangements. Mine, of course, was already there, practically bouncing with curiosity. "So, how is Busan? And don't you dare tell me it was just a business trip, because no one would believe it," her friend snapped, handing her coffee. Before Jiyeon could reply, her phone rang. It was Park Seo-jun, her ex-boyfriend from her Busan days, the one who had been the real reason for her temporary escape from the city 3 years ago. "Jiyeon, I saw your photos from the cultural festival on social media." The familiar voice sounded on the other end of the line. "I'm in Seoul on business. Can we meet?" The request caught her off guard. Seo-jun had been more than a boyfriend. He represented an alternative life that she had almost chosen, a version of herself that prioritized art over family expectations. "I need to check my schedule," she replied evasively, aware of Minha's curious gaze. "It's about the gallery," Seo-jun continued. "Remember that dream we had about opening a space for independent photographers? It's happening, G, and I want you to be a part of it." The invitation hung in the air like a ghost from the past, bringing up memories and possibilities long buried. At that moment, Dong-hwan entered the office, carrying a folder that surely contained the contract for the partnership between their companies. "I'll call you back," Jiyeon muttered into the phone, ending the call. "Good morning," Dong Hwan greeted professionally, although his eyes conveyed an intimacy that didn't go unnoticed by the surrounding employees. "Can we discuss the terms of the contract in my office?" In the elevator, alone, the formality dissipated. "You look worried," he observed. "Seo Jun called," she said simply, noticing how the name made Dong Hwan stiffen slightly. She had mentioned her ex-boyfriend during their conversations in Busan. "The photographer? He's opening a gallery in Seoul. He wants me to take part in the project." The elevator reached the executive floor, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Do you want to?" Dong Hwan finally asked, his voice neutral, but Jiyeon could feel the weight of the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's different now. I'm different." In Dong Hwan's room, the contract discussion was brief and professional, but there was an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. When Jiyeon got up to leave, he stopped her. "Jiyeon," he rarely used this informal tone at work, "I'm going to play the piano tonight. At the conservatory where I used to study. I'd like you to come." The invitation was more than a simple request. It was an openness, a vulnerability that he was choosing to share. In the evening, the conservatory was practically empty, except for a few students practicing in distant rooms. Dong Hwan led her to a room with the Steinway grand piano. "After Busan, I realized that I don't want to hide this part of myself anymore," he said, taking a seat at the piano. "And you shouldn't hide your talent either." The music he began to play was different from the festival composition. This one carried notes of expectation, of future possibilities. "Seo Jun represents a path I haven't chosen," Jiyeon said when the song ended. "But being in Busan, photographing that festival, made me realize that I don't have to completely abandon my dreams." "Then don't," Dong Hwan replied, gently closing the piano lid. "But don't let ghosts from the past dictate your future." The next day, Jiyeon met Seo Jun in a cafe near the office. He looked just as she remembered. Hair artfully messy, camera hanging around his neck, that air of freedom that had once fascinated her. "You've changed," he observed, studying her. "But your photos from the festival, I saw the same passion as before." "The passion never went away," she replied. "I just found a different way of expressing it. The gallery would be our chance to show this to the world," Seo Jun insisted, pushing an envelope toward her. "Your work would be perfect for our opening exhibition." Jiyeon looked at the envelope, thinking of his photos of Busan, not the old ones, but the new ones, which captured not just places, but moments of transformation. She thought of Dong Hwan at the piano, of how some passions can find new paths without being abandoned. "I'll think about it," she finally said, tucking the envelope into her handbag. When she returned to her office, she found a message from Dong Hwan. "Dinner tonight. I have a proposal for you." The restaurant he chose was different from the usual luxurious establishments. It was a small bistro with an exhibition of local art on the walls. "I've been thinking," he began as soon as they sat down, "about how to balance who we are with who we need to be. The Kim Group is planning to open a cultural foundation, and we need someone to run the visual arts department." Jiyeon stared at him, slowly understanding what he was suggesting. "I'm not offering this because we're together," he hastened to add. "I've seen your portfolio, your artistic eye. You'd be perfect for the project." "A bridge between the two worlds," she murmured, remembering their conversation in Busan. Jiyeon's cell phone vibrated with a message from Seo Jun. "The gallery's offer stands. Think about it carefully." Looking at Dong Hwan, who was patiently waiting for his reply, Jiyeon realized that sometimes true growth doesn't lie in choosing between two paths, but in creating your own. The Kim Group's Cultural Foundation proposal still echoed in Jiyeon's mind as she entered her makeshift home studio. The spare room, which her mother insisted on calling a waste of space, was full of undeveloped photographs and analog equipment. In the dark, the familiar process of developing Busan's photos began. The images slowly emerged into the developing liquid. Dong Hwan at the piano, his expression completely surrendered to the music, the night sea reflecting the moon, old alleyways contrasting with modern skyscrapers. Each photo told a story of transformation, not just of the city, but of themselves. Her phone vibrated with a message from her mother. Giona, Dongwon's father has invited us to dinner on Saturday. It's a formal occasion. Please dress appropriately this time. Before she could reply, another notification popped up, an email from Seojun with details of the gallery's inaugural exhibition. The theme would be urban metamorphosis, tradition and modernity in conflict. His old photos of Busan would fit in perfectly. The sound of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. It was Minha, carrying Thai food and a determined expression. "Okay, enough suspense," declared her friend, entering without ceremony. "I need to know what's going on. First the mysterious trip, then the flowers. Now I've heard rumors about you running the Chem Group's new cultural foundation." Jiyeon sighed, hanging the last photo up to dry. "It's complicated. When is it not up to you?" Minha laughed, handing out the boxes of pad thai. "But seriously, what's holding you back? It's a dream job. You could combine your passion for art with your corporate career." Seojun showed up. Jiyeon revealed, watching Minha's expression change. "He's opening a gallery and wants me to be part of the project." "The ex who almost made you drop everything? That's Seojun. He's no longer that impulsive boy from 3 years ago." Jiyeon defended automatically, surprised at her own instinct to protect him. "And the gallery's proposal is solid." "Gee." Minha placed her hashies on the table, serious. "Are you considering it because it's really what you want, or because it represents the path you haven't taken?" The question hit Jiyeon like a punch in the gut. Before he could answer, his phone rang. It was Dongwon. "Can I come over? I have something to show you." His voice sounded different, almost nervous. Half an hour later, Dongwon arrived carrying a thick briefcase and a determined expression. "I discreetly said goodbye, but not before casting a meaningful glance at Jiyeon. "I found this in the group's archives," he explained, spreading out documents on the kitchen table. They were architectural plans and proposals for a cultural complex. "The foundation won't just be a corporate department. We want to create a space that combines traditional and contemporary art with galleries, concert halls, studios." Jiyeon examined the documents, his heart racing as he saw the potential of the project. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I need you to understand that I'm not just offering you a position." He took a deep breath. "I'm offering you an opportunity to create something meaningful, something that is truly yours." "Dongwon, I saw how your eyes shone in Busan when you were photographing," he continued. "It's the same sparkle I get when I play the piano. I don't want you to choose between art and career any more than I want to choose between music and business." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of dripping. One of the photos was not yet completely dry and was gently dripping onto the floor of the makeshift studio. "Can I see?" Dongwon asked, pointing to the hanging photos. Jiyeon hesitated before turning on the light. Pictures of Busan filled the walls, some old, from Seojun's time, others recent, capturing moments of the festival and of them. "They're different," he observed, comparing the series. "The old ones are beautiful, but angrier," she added. "I was processing a lot at the time. The new ones are more hopeful." He smiled, pausing at a particular photo, him at the piano, completely absorbed in the music, the ocean visible through the window of the cultural center. Jiyeon's phone vibrated again, another message from Seojun. "I need your answer by tomorrow. The exhibition is in 3 weeks." Dongwon noticed her tense expression. "What?" "Seojun wants my old photos of Busan for the gallery's inaugural exhibition," she admitted. "The theme is about the conflict between tradition and modernity." To her surprise, Dongwon didn't seem perturbed. "It would be perfect for your photos. Both old and new." "What do you mean?" "Think about it," he approached, picking up 2 different photos of the same alley in Busan, one from 3 years ago, the other recent. "Your perspectives have changed. Why not tell that story?" The suggestion caught her off guard. "Are you encouraging me to work with Seojun?" "I'm encouraging you not to be afraid of your past," he corrected gently. "Besides, it would be a perfect project to inaugurate the foundation's visual arts area, don't you think?" Jiyeon stared at him, slowly understanding what he was proposing. A way to unite all aspects of his life, his past with Seojun, his present with Dongwon, his art and his career, without having to sacrifice any of them. "Dinner with our families on Saturday. She abruptly changed the subject. Is it as formal as my mother is making it sound? More, he admitted. My father rarely organizes family dinners. He wants to meet the person who got me back into piano. The weight of that revelation hung between them. It wasn't just a formal dinner, it was a public declaration of intent, a step that would make their relationship official in the circles that really mattered in their lives. Saturday came faster than Ji-yeon would have liked. As he prepared for dinner at the Kim mansion, his hands trembled slightly as he applied his lipstick. This time, there were no plans for sabotage. The traditional hanbok dress in shades of navy blue had been chosen with care, representing the respect for tradition that they held so dear. You look beautiful, her mother declared, adjusting the collar of her hanbok with obvious pride. Quite different from that night on the blind date. If she only knew, thought Ji-yeon, holding back a smile. The Kim mansion was exactly as expected, an impressive mix of traditional Korean architecture and modern elements. In the main garden, a fountain in the shape of a water piano created a soft melody that echoed throughout the room. Dongwon was waiting for her at the entrance, also wearing traditional hanbok. His eyes lit up at the sight of her, but he maintained the expected formality, greeting her parents first with a respectful bow. Welcome to our home. Dongwon's mother welcomed them, her natural elegance showing years of training as the wife of one of Seoul's most powerful businessmen. Dongwon's father, Kim Juno, was an imposing figure even sitting in his wheelchair, a sequel to the heart attack that had changed the course of his son's life. His keen eyes studied Ji-yeon's every move. During the traditional dinner, served at low antique wooden tables, the conversation flowed politely about business and family connections, until Kim Juno asked the question that would change the tone of the evening. Miss Lee, I hear you have an interesting project for a cultural foundation. Ji-yeon almost choked on her tea. He hadn't expected the subject to come up there, least of all from the patriarch of the family. Father, Dongwon began, but was interrupted by a gentle gesture from Jun. Let her speak, son. I want to hear it from her. Taking a deep breath, Ji-yeon found strength in Dongwon's encouraging gaze. Yes, sir. I believe the foundation can be a bridge between traditional and contemporary art. In fact, I'm working on an exhibition that explores exactly this duality. With your ex-boyfriend, I hear, Dongwon's mother remarked casually, making everyone at the table freeze. The silence that followed was deafening. Ji-yeon felt her parents' gaze on her, their disapproval practically palpable. Yes, Ji-yeon replied firmly, surprising everyone. Seo-jun is a respected curator, and our professional collaboration can benefit both his gallery and the Kim Group Foundation. Interesting, Kim Juno commented, a familiar glint in his eyes, the same one Ji-yeon had seen in Dongwon when he was assessing a complex situation. And you, Dongwon? What do you think of this collaboration? I think it demonstrates precisely the kind of vision we need for the foundation, Dongwon replied without hesitation. The ability to build bridges between different worlds, to see value where others see only conflict. The answer seemed to please his father, who nodded slightly before changing the subject. I heard you playing the piano last night. How long has it been since you did it at home? It was Dongwon's turn to look surprised. Since your heart attack. And why did you come back now? The look Dongwon threw at Ji-yeon was so full of meaning that it made his mother let out a little emotional sigh. Because some people remind us of who we really are, he replied simply. After dinner, while his parents chatted in the main room, Dongwon took Ji-yeon to the music room. The grand piano gleamed in the soft light, its ivory keys inviting. My father never asked me why I stopped playing, Dongwon commented, running his fingers lightly over the keys. I think today was the first time we really talked about music since I decided to take over the company. Maybe he's learning to build bridges too, Ji-yeon suggested, taking a seat next to him on the piano bench. Like you're doing with Seo-jun? It's different, she explained, choosing her words carefully. Seo-jun represents a version of my past that I need to reconcile, not relive. Like you at the piano, it's not about going back, but about moving forward, carrying what matters. Dongwon began to play softly, a melody that Ji-yeon recognized as the one he had composed with her in mind. Do you know why I chose you on that first date? He asked, still playing. It wasn't just because of your authenticity. It was because I saw in you the same struggle I had between who we should be and who we really are. Suddenly, the door to the music room opened, revealing Kim Jun in his wheelchair. "This composition," he said, his voice laced with emotion. "Is it yours?" "Yes, Dad," Dongwon replied, his hands still on the keys. "Go on," his father asked, entering the room. "Please." As the music filled the room, Ji-yeon watched 3 generations of expectations, dreams, and commitments intertwine in a new harmony. Kim Juno closed his eyes, letting his son's music, the first composition of his own he had heard, wash away years of unspoken regrets. Later that evening, when Ji-yeon finally got home, he found a message from Seo-jun about the final details of the exhibition and another from Dongwon. "My father wants to know your full proposal for the foundation on Monday, and he asked me to play at the opening event." Smiling, Ji-yeon began to organize her photographs, old and new, past and present, all the paths that had brought her there. Sometimes she realized we don't have to choose between 2 worlds. Sometimes we can create a new one all of our own. Monday arrived with an electric atmosphere at the Lee Corporation office. Ji-yeon was revising her presentation to Kim Juno while trying to ignore the curious looks from her colleagues. Rumors about his relationship with Dongwon and his possible transition to the Kim Group's cultural foundation circulated through the corridors like breakfast. "Are you sure about this?" Minha asked, helping her organize the folders with the preliminary projects. Working with Seo-jun and Dongwon at the same time sounds like a recipe for disaster. "It's more than that," Ji-yeon replied, inserting some of her recent photographs into the presentation. "It's about creating something meaningful, something that unites different perspectives." The phone rang. It was Seo-jun. "Ji, I need to show you something in the gallery. It's urgent. Can you come by before your meeting with the Kims?" Looking at her watch, Ji-yeon calculated that she would have enough time. The gallery was on the way to the Kim Group in a recently renovated historic building in Incheon. When he got there, he found Seo-jun supervising the installation of exhibition panels. The space was taking shape with an elegant mix of traditional Korean elements and contemporary design. "Look at this," he guided her to a specific area of the gallery. "I reserved this section for your series on urban transformation, but I had an idea after seeing your recent photos of Busan." On the wall, he had arranged some of his old photographs next to empty spaces. "Imagine the same place, different moments, different looks. Your evolution as an artist mirroring the evolution of the city." The proposal was tempting, artistically perfect, but there was something else in Seo-jun's eyes, a nostalgia that made her instinctively recoil. "Ji," he began, his voice soft. "Remember when we planned to do this together? Open our own gallery, show the world our vision." "We were different then," she replied, keeping her distance. "You wanted me to give up everything for art. I needed to find my own way. And now, with CEO Kim, have you found that path?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated, a message from Dongwon. "Dad is looking forward to getting to know you better. I brought the piano into the meeting room." Ji-yeon couldn't help but smile, which didn't go unnoticed by Seo-jun. "He makes you happy," wasn't a question. "He accepts me completely," she corrected. "The executive, the artist, all versions of me." Seo-jun nodded slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Then use that in the exhibition. Show all your truths." At the Kim Group, Ji-yeon met not only Kim Juno and Dongwon, but also Dongwon's 3 sisters and his mother. The meeting room had been transformed. The grand piano occupied one corner, digital panels displayed their photographs, and a model of the proposed cultural complex dominated the central table. "Miss Lee," Kim Juno began, his wheelchair strategically positioned between the piano and the model. "Show us your vision." Over the next hour, Ji-yeon presented not just figures and projections, but a vision of how traditional and contemporary art could coexist and enrich each other. He talked about the exhibition with Seo-jun as the inaugural project, about educational programs that would unite traditional masters and emerging artists. "And where does music fit into all this?" Kim Juno asked, looking meaningfully at the piano. Music is our first bridge, she replied, meeting Dongwon's eyes. Traditionally, in Korean culture, music and visual arts have always gone hand in hand. I propose to maintain this tradition, but with a contemporary approach. Like Dongwon's compositions with his photographs, his younger sister suggested, her eyes sparkling at the possibility. Exactly, Ji-yeon smiled. Each art form conversing with the other, creating something new without losing its roots. Kim Juno was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. Finally, he turned to his son. Play for us, Dongwon, that new composition. Dongwon sat down at the piano, but before he started, he looked at Ji-yeon. Actually, Dad, I have a new one. I composed it last night after dinner. The melody that filled the room was unlike anything Ji-yeon had ever heard from him. It began with traditional notes, reminiscent of old Korean music, but gradually incorporated contemporary elements, creating a unique harmony between past and present. When the last note faded, Kim Juno had tears in his eyes. That's it, he declared. That's exactly what we want for the foundation. Not just to preserve our culture, but to allow it to grow, to evolve. Turning to Ji-yeon, he continued, It's your position if you like. And as for the exhibition with your colleague, you have my full support. That evening, after all the meetings and decisions, Ji-yeon found herself back in the makeshift studio of her home, developing the latest photos of Busan. Dongwon watched her from the doorway. What do you think? She asked, hanging up a particular photo of him at the piano at the festival, next to an old photo of Seo-jun playing the guitar in the streets of Busan. I think there are two different parts of your story, he replied, moving closer, and that we don't need to erase the past to build the future. The gallery in Insadong was rapidly taking shape, with the white walls now filled with photographs telling stories of transformation. Ji-yeon supervised the assembly of his special section, where old and new images of Busan dialogued with each other, creating a visual narrative of change and growth. The photos are perfect side by side, Seo-jun commented, adjusting the lighting. It's like they're talking to each other across time. Ji-yeon nodded, looking particularly at two photographs, an old one showing a traditional temple surrounded by modern buildings, and a recent one of the same place, now with the temple restored and integrated harmoniously into the urban landscape. Like yourself, a familiar voice sounded behind her. Dongwon had arrived silently, carrying a folder with the Foundation's final documents, always evolving, but maintaining its essence. The simultaneous presence of the two men created a momentary tension in the air, quickly dispelled by their professionalism. Seo-jun held out his hand to Dongwon. Your compositions will be a perfect complement to the exhibition, he said sincerely. Ji-yeon showed me some recordings of the rehearsals. The project had evolved into something bigger than everyone expected. Dongwon's music would be performed live during the opening, creating a multi-sensory experience that united photography, traditional and contemporary music. As they discussed the final details, Ji-yeon's cell phone rang. It was her mother, for the 5th time that day. The news of her new position at the Kim Group's Cultural Foundation had spread quickly through her social circles. "Amma, I'm in a meeting," she answered, stepping back a little. "Yes, the inauguration dinner will be formal." "No, I haven't chosen the hanbok yet. Is your mother still trying to control the closet?" Dongwon asked when she returned, an understanding smile on his lips. "Some things never change," she sighed but smiled. "Apparently, I need to represent my new position properly." Speaking of which, Seo-jun interrupted, consulting his tablet. The press are interested in the story behind the exhibition. They want to do a story on how traditional and contemporary art can coexist. What about how ex-boyfriends can work together professionally? Dongwon joked, but there is a note of tension in his voice. The comment made Ji-yeon freeze momentarily, remembering the sensationalist headlines that were already beginning to circulate. The rebel heiress, the art triangle, romance and business, the Kim Group's new project. "We can use this to our advantage," Seo-jun suggested, surprising everyone. "Show that true art transcends personal relationships, that we can create something meaningful together, regardless of the past." Dongwon studied Seo-jun for a moment before nodding. "I agree. Our story can be part of the larger narrative about tradition and modernity meeting. That evening, after a long day of preparations, Ji-yeon and Dong-hwan walked through Namsan Park, the Seoul Tower shining above them like a beacon in the night. "Are you worried?" she finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About Seo-jun?" he paused, turning to face her. "No, I'm worried about you. With me? With the pressure you're facing? A new position, important exposure, the eyes of the media. It's a lot to handle at once." Ji-yeon smiled, gently touching his face. "I've fine. In fact, for the first time in a long time, I feel like all the pieces are falling into place. Even with your mother trying to pick out your hanbok," he teased, making her laugh. "Even so, she told me something interesting yesterday. She said she finally understands why I've always fought against her expectations. It wasn't rebellion, it was a search for authenticity." Dong-hwan pulled her close, the Seoul skyline serving as a backdrop to their moment of intimacy. "Speaking of authenticity, I have a surprise for you." From the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small velvet box. Ji-yeon's heart raced, but when she opened it, she found not a ring, but an old key. "What's that?" "The key to my grandfather's old photography studio. It was on the top floor of the Kim Group's first building. It's been closed for years, but I thought you could turn it into something of your own." The proposal was more significant than any ring could have been at that moment. It was Dong-hwan offering not just a physical space, but a place for his art within his world. "Did your father approve?" "It was his idea." Dong-hwan smiled. "He said that the foundation needs a heart, not just a structure." The soft evening wind carried the scent of cherry blossoms, heralding the arrival of spring. With the key in her hands, Ji-yeon felt she was finally ready to open not just a new door, but a new chapter in her life. The day before the exhibition opened turned the gallery in Insadong into a whirlwind of activity. Ji-yeon was overseeing the final adjustments to the lighting while Dong-hwan was rehearsing with a small ensemble of traditional musicians, mixing his contemporary compositions with ancient instruments. "The press have started to arrive," Minher announced, rushing in with a checklist in hand. "And there are some important art critics among them." Ji-yeon took a deep breath, instinctively adjusting the blazer her mother had insisted she wear for the preliminary interviews. In the reflection of one of the showcases, she saw Seo-jun guiding the technical team through the multimedia panels that would connect the different sections of the exhibition. Miss Lee, an Arts Korea journalist, approached, microphone in hand. "Could you tell us about the inspiration behind this unique fusion of photography and traditional music?" Before she could answer, the notes of the Gaegeum, played by one of Dong-hwan's sisters, filled the space, intertwining perfectly with the piano. The melody captured everyone's attention, creating a moment of pause in the frenetic bustle. "Inspiration lies in exactly that," Ji-yeon replied, gesturing to the harmony that was forming, in the way that different art forms, different moments in time, can create something entirely new without losing their original essence. The answer seemed to satisfy the journalist, who then turned to Dong-hwan, now approaching the group. The contrast between his impeccable suit and his still warm piano fingers did not go unnoticed by the cameras. "Mr. Kim, how did you come up with the idea of incorporating live music into the exhibition?" "It was a natural evolution," he replied, exchanging a complicit glance with Ji-yeon. Just as the photographs show the transformation of Busan over time, the music tells its own story of change and continuity. In the afternoon, while the interviews went on, Ji-yeon escaped to the old studio in the Kim Group building. The space, still undergoing renovation, held traces of Dong-hwan's grandfather's photographic history. Old cameras and developing equipment shared space with state-of-the-art digital technology. "I thought I'd find you here," Kim Juno's voice surprised her. His wheelchair glided silently across the restored wooden floor. "My father used to do the same thing before big events, take refuge here to organize his thoughts." "Mr. Kim," Ji-yeon bowed respectfully. "I was just seeking inspiration," he added, an understanding smile on his wrinkled face. When Dong-hwan first told me about you, I confess I was apprehensive. One more artist who could distract him from his responsibilities, I thought." Ji-yeon felt his heart squeeze, but Juno continued, I was wrong, of course. You haven't diverted him from his responsibilities. You've helped him find a balance that I've never managed in my own life. So, let me finish. He held up a wrinkled hand. This studio was closed for decades because it represented a choice I couldn't make. My father was an artist who had to become an entrepreneur. I followed in his footsteps and almost forced Don Juan to do the same. From downstairs, fragments of the rehearsed music could be heard, piano notes intertwined with traditional instruments. But you, June smiled, you've shown that we don't have to choose. That art and business, tradition and innovation can coexist and strengthen each other. The moment was interrupted by Seo Jun, who appeared at the door with some documents. Sorry to interrupt, but we need final approval for the exhibition catalog. Kim Juno watched the interaction between Ji-yeon and Seo Jun with interest. Sometimes, he commented, you have to revisit the past to better understand the present. Don't you agree, Mr. Park? Seo Jun seemed momentarily disconcerted by the Kim patriarch's insight. Yes, sir. Ji-yeon's old photographs helped us build a richer narrative for the exhibition. And for life, Juno added enigmatically, maneuvering his chair towards the exit. I invite you for tea in my office after the rehearsal. There are some stories about the studio that you should know. When they were alone, Seo Jun handed Ji-yeon the documents. Your work has come a long way, he commented, leafing through the preliminary catalog. Your photos have always been technically perfect, but now they have a different depth. People change, she replied simply. Yes, they do, he agreed, a wistful smile playing on his lips. You know, when you left Busan, I was angry for a long time. I couldn't understand how someone could choose the corporate world over pure art. And now I understand that it wasn't a question of choice, but of growth. You haven't abandoned art. You've found your own way of expressing it. The morning of the opening brought with it a gentle rain in Seoul, creating a play of reflections in the windows of the gallery in Insadong. Ji-yeon watched the drops drip down the glass as she organized the last details of the exhibition. The photographs, now perfectly arranged and illuminated, told not only the story of Busan, but his own journey of transformation. Tea with Kim Juno the day before had revealed surprising stories about the old photo studio. Don Juan's grandfather, as well as being a businessman, had been a passionate photographer who documented the post-war reconstruction of Seoul. His images, some of which would be included in a special section of the exhibition, showed a city being reborn from the ashes, much like Ji-yeon felt he was being reborn in his own life. The flowers have arrived, Minha announced, interrupting his thoughts. And you won't believe who sent them. It was an elaborate arrangement of white and pink peonies, Ji-yeon's mother's favorite flowers. The card bore a simple message. To the artist who never stopped being, King Shu-yul. Your future father-in-law has good taste, Minha teased, but was interrupted by the arrival of Seo Jun, carrying an old wooden box. I found these in the gallery storage room, he explained, placing the box on a table. They're some of your first photographs of Busan, the ones you never wanted to show. Ji-yeon immediately recognized the box. It was where he kept his most personal photos, the ones that captured not only the city, but his own anguish at the time. Images of dark alleys, abandoned buildings, distorted reflections in puddles of water, a snapshot of his emotional state during those turbulent months in Busan. Why did you keep this? She asked, her voice softer than she had intended. Because even then I knew that one day you'd be ready to confront that part of your story, Seo Jun replied, his honesty disarming. And maybe now is the time. The sound of the piano interrupted the conversation. Dongwon had arrived for the final rehearsal. The melody that flowed was the new composition, the one he had created especially for the exhibition. It was a piece that began with melancholy notes, reminiscent of old photographs of Busan, but gradually transformed into something more hopeful, more luminous. Ji-yeon opened the box, spreading out the old photographs on the table. Next to the current images, the transformation was even more evident, not just of the city, but of her own vision as an artist. Let's use them, she decided suddenly. Not all of them, but some. They're part of the story, too. The decision caused a minor uproar among the gallery staff, who had to quickly rearrange some panels to accommodate the new images. But when the photographs were finally hung, something magical happened. The narrative took on an unexpected depth. "It's perfect," Dongwon's voice sounded behind her. He had stopped playing and was now looking at the photographs with intensity. "It's like the past and the present are talking to each other." Kim Juno arrived shortly afterwards, his wheelchair guided by his wife. His eyes roamed the gallery with particular interest in the new additions. "Courage," he commented, stopping in front of one of the darker photographs. "It takes courage to expose our shadows like that." The afternoon progressed, and with it the anticipation for the opening grew. Journalists began to arrive for the last interviews, our critics circulated making notes, and music began to mix with the buzz of conversation. In a moment of calm, Ji-yeon took refuge in a small room at the back of the gallery. Through the ajar door, he could hear fragments of conversations, piano notes, and the sound of glasses being arranged for the cocktail party. "Are you hiding?" Dongwon asked, finding her there. "Just breathing," she replied, nervously adjusting her modernized traditional dress, a creation that mixed elements of hanbok with contemporary design. "I have something for you," he said, taking a small package out of his pocket. Inside was an old brass key, different from the one in the studio. It was from my grandfather's personal archive. He kept his most important photographs in a secret room in the studio. I found it last night while I was looking for some old sheet music. The discovery was more than symbolic. It was as if the past was offering its own blessings for the future they were building. "After the inauguration," he continued, "I want to show you what I found there. I think it will be of particular interest to you for the Foundation's next project." The sound of clinking glasses announced the start of the reception for VIP guests. It was time to face the public, to present to the world not just an art exhibition, but a statement about transformation, growth, and the courage to face the past in order to build the future. "Ready?" Dongwon asked, offering his arm. Ji-yeon looked one last time at the key in her hand, then at the photographs that told her story, and finally at the man next to her who had helped turn her shadows into light. "Ready," she replied, holding the key close to her heart. The opening of the exhibition transformed the gallery in Insadong into a kaleidoscope of emotions and memories. The space was packed with important guests from Seoul's artistic and corporate world, all eager to witness the unique fusion of photography and music that Ji-yeon and Dongwon had created. The first musical performance of the evening began with Dongwon at the piano, accompanied by traditional instruments. The melody echoed through the gallery as the guests made their way through the exhibition, observing the visual journey that began with the old photographs of Busan and culminated in the most recent images. "It's extraordinary how you've managed to capture the essence of transformation," commented a renowned art critic, stopping in front of a particular series of photographs. "There's a raw honesty in the old images that contrasts beautifully with the hopefulness of the new ones." Ji-yeon, dressed in her modernized hanbok, navigated among the guests with a grace that surprised even her mother. Years of corporate meetings had taught her the art of diplomacy, but tonight was different. She was presenting not just a project, but her heart on display in pictures. In a quieter corner of the gallery, she found Seo-jun chatting animatedly with a curator from the National Museum of Modern Art. "They want to take the exhibition to Tokyo," he informed her when she approached. Apparently, the idea of fusing tradition and modernity resonated strongly with them. The news was unexpected and exciting, but before she could fully process its significance, Kim Juno requested her presence. The Kim family patriarch was positioned strategically next to the section displaying his father's photographs, the old studio now revitalized in the Kim Group building clearly visible in the images. "Look at this," he said, pointing to one photograph in particular. It showed his father, young and determined, photographing the ruins of Seoul after the war. He believed that documenting reconstruction was as important as participating in it. Art and business, preservation and progress. He understood that one doesn't exist without the other. The music changed, and Dongwon began to play his new composition, the one he had created especially for Ji-yeon's most recent photographs. The notes flowed through the gallery like a story being told, each chord revealing a new layer of meaning in the images on display. "You know," continued Kim Juno, his voice laced with emotion. When Dongwon said he wanted to incorporate music into the exhibition, I thought it was just another artistic whim. But now I understand. He's doing exactly what my father did with photography, telling the story of transformation through his own art. The evening progressed, and the exhibition proved to be an undisputed success. Critics praised the originality of the concept, entrepreneurs discussed possible partnerships with the Cultural Foundation, and even the most skeptical recognized the unique harmony achieved between the different elements. During a break in the musical performances, Dongwon found Ji-yeon near the section displaying her most personal photographs of Busan. "Are you ready for Tokyo?" he asked, a smile playing on his lips. "Did you know about the invitation?" The curator approached me first, wanting to know if we could adapt the musical performance to their space, he explained. But he said it would be up to you. At that moment, looking at the photographs that recounted her journey, from the anguished days in Busan to the present moment of realization, Ji-yeon felt a deep sense of gratitude for all the choices that had brought her there. Every image, every musical note, every difficult decision had contributed to this moment of synthesis. "Do you know what's most interesting?" she commented, intertwining her fingers with Dongwon's. "When I took these old photos, I was trying to get away from who I was supposed to be. Now they've helped me find exactly who I am." The key to Dongwon's grandfather's secret archive weighed heavily in her pocket, reminding her that there were still more stories to be discovered, more paths to be explored. The idea of taking the exhibition to Tokyo no longer seemed daunting. It was just another chapter in the story they were building together. At the end of the evening, as the last guests began to say goodbye, Seo-jun approached the couple with a bottle of champagne. "For new beginnings," he proposed, a genuine smile on his face. "And for the art that unites us, even when our paths separate." Kim Juno insisted on making a final toast, his firm voice echoing through the now quieter gallery. "To the courage to face the past, the wisdom to embrace the present, and the vision to build a future where art and business, tradition and innovation can flourish together." As the glasses clinked and the last piano notes floated in the air, Ji-yeon realized that he had finally found his place, not in the corporate or artistic world exclusively, but in the unique space he had created between them, where all his truths could coexist in harmony. With the success of the exhibition in Seoul and the invitation to Tokyo, Ji-yeon and Dongwon's lives went into a fast rhythm of preparations and changes. The old studio in the Kim Group building had become a creative sanctuary where they spent hours planning the expansion of the Cultural Foundation. The morning they finally decided to explore Dongwon's grandfather's secret archive, the antique brass key felt heavy in their hands. The small room, hidden behind a sliding bookcase, revealed a treasure trove of photographs and documents that no one had touched in decades. "Look at this," Ji-yeon whispered, pulling out a particularly old album. The pages contained photographs of the construction of Seoul's first skyscrapers, each image accompanied by meticulous annotations by Dongwon's grandfather. "He documented everything," Dongwon observed, leafing through another album. "Not just the physical reconstruction of the city, but the people, their stories. Among the documents, they found something surprising: handwritten scores. These are your grandfather's compositions," Ji-yeon realized, recognizing the date on the notes. "Was he a musician too?" "Dad never mentioned that," Dongwon murmured, his fingers tracing the notes on the yellowed paper. "All these compositions are about Seoul, about reconstruction." The discovery created an unexpected bridge between past and present, echoing his own attempts to unite art and business. While they were organizing the material, Kim Juno appeared in the doorway of the archive, his wheelchair silent on the old floor. "I thought I'd find you here," he smiled, his eyes sparkling with memories. "I see you've discovered my father's secret. Why didn't you ever tell us about the compositions?" Dongwon asked, still holding the sheet music. "Because some truths need to be discovered at the right time," June replied enigmatically. "My father believed that art and business were two sides of the same coin, both build, transform, leave legacies." In the days that followed, Dongwon dedicated himself to studying his grandfather's compositions, adapting them to be included in the performance in Tokyo. Ji-yeon, meanwhile, immersed herself in historical photographs, weaving a narrative that connected 3 generations of urban and personal transformation. News of the discovery of the secret archive quickly spread through artistic and business circles. The project for Tokyo expanded to incorporate not only Ji-yeon's photographs and Dongwon's compositions, but also the newly discovered legacy of the Kim patriarch. One afternoon, while they were working in the studio, Seo-jun came up with an interesting proposal. The National Museum wants to make a documentary about 3 generations of entrepreneur artists, he explained, showing the project. Your story is unique. The idea of the documentary initially made Ji-yeon apprehensive. Exhibiting photographs was one thing, but sharing her personal journey on video seemed intimidating. However, Dongwon saw something else. It's a chance to show that we don't have to choose between who we are and who we should be, he argued softly. Just like my grandfather did, we can create our own path. Preparation for Tokyo intensified. Mornings were filled with foundation meetings, afternoons with music rehearsals and photography sessions, and evenings with long conversations about art, legacy, and the future. On one of these evenings in the studio, while Dongwon was playing one of his grandfather's compositions on the newly installed piano, Ji-yeon made a surprising discovery in one of the albums, a photograph of his own grandfather, young and smiling, helping to build one of the Kim Group's first buildings. Our stories were already intertwined before we were even born, she realized, showing the photo to Dongwon. The music stopped, and he joined her in examining the image. Maybe it's no coincidence that we met in that peculiar way, he smiled, recalling their disastrous first flying date. On the eve of their departure for Tokyo, Kim Juno called a family meeting in the garden of the mansion. The water piano played softly in the background as he made a surprising announcement. I've decided that it's time for a change in the leadership of the Kim Group, he declared, causing a tense silence. Dongwon will take over as chairman, but on one condition. The Cultural Foundation will be the heart of the group, not just a department. The statement was met with astonishment, especially from the more conservative board members present. But June wasn't finished. Art and business are not opposites, he continued, his voice firm. They're like the 2 hands of a pianist. They need to work in harmony to create something truly meaningful. That evening, alone in the studio, Ji-yeon and Dongwon reflected on how their lives had changed since that first meeting. The photographs on the walls, old and new, told the story not just of cities changing, but of people discovering who they really were. You know, Dongwon commented, gently strumming the piano, when you showed up at that restaurant, all disheveled and determined to push me away, something in me recognized a truth that I'd been trying to ignore. What truth? That sometimes we need to break the rules to find our own way, he smiled, starting to play a familiar melody, the first composition he had created with her in mind. The notes floated around the studio as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow they would leave for Tokyo, carrying with them not only art and music, but a story of transformation that began long before them and would continue long after. It was a symphony of tomorrow, made up of notes of courage, brushstrokes of truth, and the perfect harmony between who they were and who they had chosen to become.